So just a couple quick things about the syllabus here. Right? So important stuff. I know that this is something that seems kind of trivial, but when addressing your instructors, if you know the person you're talking to has a doctorate, call them doctor. If you don't know whether the person you're talking to has a doctorate or not, call them professor. In general, people don't really like it when they have worked to get an advanced degree and you call them Mr. or Ms. or Miss, right? So the reason I say all this, you must be Grace. Pardon? Okay, did you just register?
I guess.
Are you here for composition 2? For 1101? Okay, then I think you're in the wrong classroom.
Okay, it's not 2 and 3?
This is English 1102.
Okay.
Okay, okay, can I see your schedule quickly?
Well, I tried to log into it and it wouldn't let me.
But this is the room you were told to go to?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, then you are probably supposed to be here, you're just not in the system yet, so you just stay here for today, and at the end of class we'll figure out where it is you're supposed to be. Okay, right. Where was I? Okay, yeah, so the reason I talk about ways to address people, right, is that I do want to talk about how to get in touch with me, right? The best way to do that is just using the email address that's listed on the syllabus, right, michael.moyer@gsw.edu. I will respond within 24 hours on a weekday. It might take me a little longer on a weekend, right? I don't check emails often on weekends. So do not try to contact me using the Georgia View email because I don't check it. I don't like the interface, so I just don't bother with it. So I'm just telling you now, right, just don't try to contact me through Georgia View. Because the message is just going to sit there.
I don't think any of the professors use it.
You'd be hard pressed to find one that doesn't.
Yeah, we all hate it.
Honestly saying, not for me to check it.
Start a petition.
The one thing I would ask is if you please put the phone away and keep it out for the duration of the class, like away, like as away as you can. I will explain why in a minute. Office hours. So my office hours are Monday, Wednesday, 12:30 to 3:15, and Tuesday, Thursday, 10 to 12. My office is room 239 across the hall, but you can't go there because pandemic, and it's a tiny little room, right? So what we do instead, right, if you want to talk to me about something, shoot me an email. You can always get in touch with me during those times. And I will set up a chat room in Blackboard, and I'll send you an invitation. We can talk then, right? So yeah, you can still contact me during office hours. Please do contact me during office hours. That's what they're there for. Just don't come to my physical office because it's not safe for any of us. Okay, great. So we have here the list of university and department approved learning outcomes. Let me just sort of briefly explain what my objectives are for this class. What I want you to get out of it. Okay, so first and foremost, improved reading comprehension. You cannot be a good writer if you are not a good reader. And so we're going to focus, especially early in the course, on making all of us into good readers. Secondly, I want to help all of you improve your bullshit detectors. So we are going to talk about, particularly by the end of class today, a couple of thinking techniques that we can use to recognize dodgy or sloppy thinking so that we can correct course when we start to see ourselves doing that, and so that we can recognize it when other people are doing it, right? Which seems, more important today than has ever been the case. We are also going to work on increasing our vocabularies. There are exercises we're going to be doing that will help with this. And there are a couple of reasons why I want to do this. Like, one, I've noticed in past semesters that this has been a bit of a problem, right? That I'm giving people things to read, and they don't understand what they're reading because they won't look up words. Having to look up a word does not mean you're dumb, right? No, not knowing what a word means and then not looking it up, right? That's the dumb thing. Right? So don't just skip over words when you don't know what they mean, right? Take a second, look them up, and yeah, we will be doing some exercises to reinforce this as well, right? And in general, right, if you don't know something, what's the best thing to do?
Figure it out.
Yeah, ask about it, right?
Ask
Ask
my parents, like, if I read a book and I see something,
Uh-huh.
I'm like, what's this word?
Yeah, like honestly, like one of the surest signs of intelligence is that you recognize the limits of your own knowledge, right? And you know when you need help. So never be afraid or ashamed to ask for help, right? Finally, you're going to write a researched argument. That is the culminating assignment for the course. Right, and roughly 7 to 9 page researched argument using secondary sources, right? So that's what we're going to get to from here. How many of you have written a research paper before? Okay, now was the research paper you wrote, was it an argument where you defended a thesis, or was it a report?
More of a report.
Yeah,
More of a report? Okay, yeah, and generally that seems to be the case. Like when I talk to people who've done a research paper in high school, that's usually what they did, right? It's like, the main exports of Bangladesh are blah, 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 right? So yeah, we are going to be doing something more complex than that. But by the time we get to the end of the term, we're going to know how to do it, right? Okay, so any questions so far? Okay, so there are 2 textbooks that you need for this course. The first, the one we're going to be using immediately, is Writing Analytically, 8th edition by David Rosenwasser and Jill Stephen. We're going to start using this one next week, Reading the World by Michael Austin, 4th edition. So, if for whatever reason you do not yet have the textbooks and won't be able to get them till, say, next week, let me know. I can probably get you a PDF of a chapter or 2, right? I can't do more than that because then I'm running afoul of the law, right? Copyright law is a bitch. Because textbooks are expensive. And I get the textbook market is a racket. I completely 100% agree with that. That said, get the books somehow, right? I don't care if you buy them from the bookstore. I don't care if you get them online somehow. I don't care if you have to steal them, right? I'm not your babysitter. I'm not responsible for your moral development. Just get the books, right? And if you can't, for whatever reason, let me know. Okay, moving right along here. As far as what you're going to be graded on. So there are going to be 2 papers. The first is going to be a close reading of a single text. That'll happen around midterm. I'll explain what close reading is a little bit later in the period, if you've never done it before. Paper 2 is that researched argument that I was telling you about. So that is the biggest single assignment, right? The biggest single part of your grade. But most of what we're going to be doing are smaller assignments that will build up to these bigger assignments, right? So by the time you actually have to turn in paper 2, you will already have done a lot of work on it. Participation is going to be worth 10% of your grade. Now let me explain how participation works here, right? So if you show up and you sit in the seat and you don't fall asleep and you turn everything in, you get a 70, right? That's kind of bare minimum, you know, you're present and breathing, but not actively participating, right? So if you want more participation points, right, contact me during office hours, ask questions, speak up, go to the writing center, right? All these other kinds of, you know, show that you are interested and motivated, right? And that is what will improve your participation grade. You're also going to be writing 3 short reflection papers on the readings that we're going to be doing, and those you can use those as starting points for the bigger papers. You're going to be doing homework assignments out of writing analytically. I know that, you know, 40% sounds like a lot of your grade, but you're going to be doing 8 of those, right? So they're each only worth 5 points individually. Now, it's still enough that, you know, it's a problem if you miss one, but it's not enough that your whole grade hinges on one homework assignment, right? And these vocabulary assignments, so this is what I was talking about right here, right? What I want you to do with each of the readings I give you, starting with the Seneca essay we're going to read next week, is give me a list, when you come to class, of at least 3 words that you had to look up, and their definitions. And believe me, in each of the readings I give you, there will be at least 3 words that you will have to look up, right? Now, to sweeten the pot a little bit here, yeah, so three words, right? That's the minimum. You will get more points if you give me more words that you had to look up, right? So, put that little bit of extra hustle in. Right. Anything else? Any questions about the assignments? If anybody has questions about anything at any time, please just stop me and ask. I don't know. Okay, so attendance policy. I do have the attendance policy. You get essentially 3 unexcused absences, right? Think of them like sick days from a job. You don't have to call in. You don't have to tell me why you weren't here. You don't have to explain yourself. You get those 3 freebies, but those are the only 3 days you get, right? Giving me a doctor's excuse or telling me why you were absent doesn't get you more absences. So make sure that you use them wisely. You know, it's what, you know, this class starts at 2 in the afternoon, right? If you can't get your ass out of bed by 2, right, then you probably have bigger problems than I can help you with. But
Feels attacked.
No, like, I'm not
you're here and you're participating and you're talking, so you're awake.
I'm attacked. No.
So if for whatever reason you know you are going to be out, particularly for a health-related reason, you know, again, given, you know, the fact that the world is collapsing around us, right? Tell me as soon as you know you're going to be out, right? And then I can help set up a plan for you so that you can stay caught up. Because it's way easier to keep up than it is to catch up, right? If you miss 2 weeks of class and haven't done anything in those 2 weeks, it's a lot harder to go back and catch up on the work you missed than if you are staying engaged, right? Even if you can't be here. So yeah, if you let me know what's going on, I can work with you. If you don't tell me, you're still responsible for the work, but you're not getting any help, right? Okay, health and safety expectations. This is kind of a biggie lately. So everybody is wearing a mask. Everybody is required to be masked. Everybody must keep their nose and mouth covered at all times, right? I know it's uncomfortable. I know it's unpleasant. Believe me, this thing is killing me, right? It is really, really hard to talk and breathe in this.
Why are you wearing 2?
Well, the one underneath is an N95. And yeah, essentially, you know, part of it is to calm my wife's anxieties.
Okay.
Yeah. But and also part of it is because I'm also the one doing the most talking. And as such, I have the most spray that needs to be caught.
I mean, I Do I pack you lying?
Yeah, yeah. Well, and you know, that actually points to the other issue, to like the real reason we wear the masks, right, is not so much to avoid getting sick ourselves, but to avoid spreading it to other people, right?
Right.
If we are sick or if we are asymptomatic. Because I don't know what any of you are going home to, right? You don't know what anybody else in this room is going home to. So if we all wear a mask and we all, you know, wash our hands a lot and we all wipe down our workstations when we're done, right? When we're at the end of class, I'll give everybody a rag, you wipe down your desk. Then nobody takes the Rona home to grandma, right? And that's what's important. Okay, what else? Health and safety expectations. Okay, accommodations. So if you have a diagnosed disability that entitles you to accommodations, you don't have to tell me what that is, right? We never have to have a conversation about it. You go to Sanford Hall, 3rd floor, because of course the Disability Services office is on the 3rd floor of an inaccessible building, right? Because that makes sense. And you tell them what your disability is, you give them your documentation, and they will send me a letter that tells them what accommodations you're entitled to, right? And I never need to know what your disability is because that's none of my goddamn business, right? All I need to know is what accommodations I'm supposed to give you. And you know, provided that I get the letter from Disability Services, you will get those accommodations. If you do need accommodations, it's better to deal with that sooner rather than later, right? Okay, Writing Center. How many of you have used the Writing Center before? Does everybody know where the Writing Center is?
Library?
It's in the library, yep, all the way back, right? 1st floor all the way back. So they can help you with any assignment at any stage of the assignment. Just take them the assignment you're working on, explain what it is you need to do, and you know they will help you with the paper, right? I do also give extra credit on paper 1 and paper 2 if you go to the Writing Center. And you will get participation points. Like you won't get extra credit on the smaller assignments for it, but you'll get participation points, right? You know, apart from that, just, you know, the intrinsic satisfaction of having produced a better paper, right? Should be sufficient motivation, but usually isn't, hence the credit. I also want to talk a little bit about the electronic devices policy here, right? So, I know that this sounds cranky and mean and unpleasant and boring, right? And it probably is. But let me explain why I do this, right? This is actually founded in neuroscience research. We all think that we're better multitaskers than we really are, right? The problem is the human brain did not actually evolve to multitask very well. It evolved primarily to focus intensely on particular tasks, right? So we're at our best when we are most attentive. We are at our worst when our attention is divided amongst a variety of things. And even if we're not actively looking at our phones, if we just have them out on the desk or whatever, right? It's still a distraction. It's still a reminder of everything else that phone connects you to, right? So the reason I want you to just come in, sit down, and put the phone away is so that for at least a few minutes before we start, you're just kind of like getting in the space, right? And I know like this sounds like hippy-dippy wellness shit, right? You know, I personally believe that most, let's say like corporate wellness and mindfulness initiatives are bullshit. And they're an excuse for companies not to do things like treat their employees like human beings or give them reasonable schedules or decent pay. Just meditate for a little while, it'll be great. But you get my point, right? You know, essentially what I'm trying to do is get you to disconnect for a little while, pay attention to where you are and what you're doing, and not what you're planning on doing later, or what your family wants you to do, or what your friends are up to, right? Just focus on what we're doing right now in this room and you will get more out of the class. And you will thus do better in the class, right? Okay, academic dishonesty. This is something that's been, like, this has become a more confusing point to people in recent semesters. So let me just go over briefly what constitutes academic dishonesty in this class and what the penalties are for it. Okay, so for the purposes of this class, academic dishonesty consists in 1, turning in work that you didn't actually do. Right? Whether you cut and paste something from the internet, or you paid a paper mill to write a paper for you, or you got your friend to write a paper, whatever, right? Any work that you didn't do that you try to represent as your own, that's academic dishonesty. The second example of academic dishonesty for our purposes here is turning in work that you did not do for this class without permission. So say I give you something to read, like, like an excerpt from Frederick Douglass, right? And you're like, oh, I wrote a paper on this in high school. And you just try to submit the paper you already wrote from high school, right? Is that going to pass muster here? No, because you didn't do it for this class, right? You're trying to do an end run around my assignment by submitting something that you've already done for another class with other purposes to get out of doing some work, right? So all the work you do has to be original for this class. You can talk to me about assignments and see if you can revise things that you've written in the past, but I would need to see the original assignment, and there would have to be substantial revision, right? Now, in terms of this first point here, if you take something you found on the internet and you substantially reword it, or you put it all into your own words, and then submit it, is that okay?
No.
This is a point people often get confused on. Yeah, no, that is not okay. It's not enough to put it in your own words, because you're still taking someone else's idea, right, and not giving them credit. So anytime that you use ideas that you got from someone else, remember that you need to provide a citation, right? And you cannot submit your whole assignment based on someone else's ideas. Now, in terms of what the penalties are for academic dishonesty. So first offense, you get a 0 on the assignment, and I send a report to the student conduct office because, frankly, I don't give people second chances anymore. I've been burned too many times, right? Second offense, I send another report to the student conduct office, and you automatically fail the class. Remember that 3 reports of academic dishonesty in the student conduct office leads to suspension, right? So do not do this. It's not worth it. And really, like, the big reason why I don't want people plagiarizing has nothing to do with theft of ideas or anything like that. My problem is that the assignments in the course are designed to teach you particular skills, right? And if you don't do the assignments yourself, then you're not learning the skills that you need to learn to complete future assignments, or that you will be using in future courses, right? So the reason I want you to do the work yourself, even if it's hard and even if you have trouble with it, is because if you don't do it yourself, you're not going to learn how to do it. And you're just going to have to keep cheating until eventually you get caught, right? Okay, a couple more things. Title IX, sexual discrimination. So I'm required to let all of you know, and I'm sure you've all heard this spiel already from several of your professors, if this is not the first class you've had today. If you tell me, if you were the victim of any kind of sex-based discrimination or harassment and you tell me about it, I am required to report it to our Title IX coordinator, Gina Wilson, in the Human Resources Office, right? This doesn't mean that you shouldn't tell me about things if you think I can help you, right? Or if you think I can point you in the direction of resources. But do know that if you do tell me about an incident, I can't keep it between us, right? I am required to report it. The last policy item on the syllabus, I'm actually not allowed to talk about. This has to do with the campus carry bill. So the information here should keep you informed as to what your particular rights are. And yeah, let you know where to go in case you need more information. So, does everybody understand here, by the way, how, so if we look at the week to week here, does everybody understand how the syllabus here works? So if I have 119, review syllabus, introduction to analysis, homework, read writing analytically, chapter 1, everybody understands, right, that what I have listed for homework is what I want you to do for next time, right? I don't expect you to have had chapter 1 of the book read for today, right? So everything that's listed under homework is what I expect you to do for next time. So for next time, I will usually note on the board as well what I want you to do for next time. And if there are any special instructions, I'll put them up here as well. So for example, so for next time, I want you to read chapter 1, and I want you to pay particular attention to the section on what the book calls the method, because that is what we're going to be using to analyze texts throughout the course, right? So the earlier you can internalize that, the better. All right, so any questions about the syllabus, about the course, about life, the universe, anything?
I think we're good.
Okay. All right, then let's just go ahead and jump right in. So what I would like to do first is a little thinking exercise. So, get out some paper and a pencil. And I am going to put a quotation from a novel up on the projector screen here. And what you are going to do is try to guess what the animal is that is being described in the quotation.
Do you want us to turn this in, or?
No, you don't have to turn it in, right? So you can just kind of take notes, right?
Yeah.
But what I want you to do is, not just try to figure out what the animal is, but try to build a case for that animal, right? List all the pieces of evidence that you think support your interpretation. Now, there will probably be a couple of words in this passage that you do not know. What should you do about those words?
I'll ask you.
Just ask me what they mean, yeah.
Oh yeah, we can't use that bad.
Nope.
That was mostly context clues.
Yeah, you might also be able to you might be able to figure them out through context clues, but it's probably better to just ask me what it means. That way you can be sure, right? Hand eraser. And we're in no hurry, so just take your time.
When you're talking about their foreparts, are you talking about like the bottom of their legs, or?
Yeah, so like the four parts of their legs and feet, so like four parts would be your forearms and your your shins and calves. Yeah.
Okay, I was just making.
Yep. Yes.
What is the pudenda?
Okay, pudenda is the plural form of pudendum. I know that doesn't help you yet, but just wait.
Yeah,
And the word refers to someone's external sex organs.
me again. What is antipathy?
Antipathy. So antipathy, from the Greek, anti, against, and pathos, feeling. So it literally means feeling against. Essentially what it means is dislike.
What's a lank hair?
Okay. So lank, when referring to hair, is sort of straight, flat, often a little greasy. And do we all understand what frizzled means in relation to hair?
Yeah, when it's crazy.
Yeah, like curly and dry, right? Yeah. Neither of these are words you use when you think someone's hair looks good.
What are doves? Doves home or something?
Doves are breasts.
Okay.
When you think you've got something, you can explain it, just go ahead and speak up.
I might have one idea, but I don't think it's right. I'm thinking about a sloth.
A sloth. Okay, why a sloth?
Well, it's because they're really because, I mean, they don't have any hair on the bottom. You talked about their claws
Uh-huh.
and how they climbed on trees and stuff like that.
Okay.
And then that's about all I could think of it, why it would be a sloth. And also it's like brown.
Okay, are all of them brown?
I don't know. The only ones I can think of are brown.
I mean, not sloths, all of these creatures.
No, they can be several colors of red, black, and yellow.
So their skin is.
Yeah, their skin is brown, right? So yeah, but that's also pointing to part of the reason why it can't be a sloth.
Right.
What are sloths that these creatures are not?
Slow.
They're slow, right? So we said these creatures move with prodigious agility, right? So they're fast.
I'm gonna be real, like, it's hard for me to read stuff when it's so bunched together like that. Like,
Yeah,
it has to be spaced out. So I was like, kind of also can't see.
There's another reason as well why it can't be a sloth. What do sloths have all over their bodies?
Hair.
Oh, yeah,
Hair.
yeah.
And these creatures do not, right?
Correct.
Well, it said they had hair. They have
Mhm.
like the frizzy hair, and then they
Yeah,
had the beard. So they have it. It's just the rest of the body they're bare.
yeah. Where do these creatures have hair?
Uh, back.
Yep, their head, breasts, and back, right? But on the back, it's just a thin ridge, right? The men have beards, right? What about the females?
They're not large.
Mm-hmm. Yep, they're smaller.
They're small.
Greasy hair.
Mm-hmm.
Black hair. No facial hair.
Yeah, they lack hair in their faces.
Why am I so stumped?
What's that?
I said, why am I so stumped by this? Like, I'm
I'm
like,
reading it. I'm thinking like, it's like people.
Okay.
But people don't climb trees like that, you know? Like, they don't have
Well,
claws
not-
either.
not-
I mean,
They don't have claws either, but.
Well, think about this. Like, what would suggest to you that this is a person? This is a human being?
It talks about the beards.
Okay.
And how the female is usually smaller than.
Mm-hmm. Although that's true of a lot of animals.
Right,
Yeah.
right. Different color hair.
Yep.
See,
different.
but then you've got claws and stuff and
Uh-huh.
climbing trees, so I know it's not that. But it's saying that not the whole body's covered in hair.
Mm-hmm.
So, man, you know.
Yeah. I mean, the
There's
claws.
also not a set skin color.
Yeah.
So that as well.
Yep. No set skin or hair
Bumps
colors.
that.
Yep.
So I really.
So yeah, you're actually right.
Huh.
The creature being described here is a human being,
Okay.
but it's like a primitive human being in a state of nature,
That's what I
right?
was thinking. Just
So
talking
the-
about climbing trees.
Yeah, the climbing trees and the claws, right? So that's,
Right.
people who aren't cutting their fingernails or their toenails, right?
Right.
Yeah, so we've got this kind of this ape-like creature, right? Now, this is a passage from a novel by Jonathan Swift called Gulliver's Travels. Which I'm sure many of you have heard of even if you've never read it, and you may not be familiar with this part of it, right? Usually, if people are familiar with any part of Gulliver's Travels, they're familiar with the part where he lands on the island full of very, very tiny people. So these creatures in the book are called yahoos, and they live on an island that is ruled by hyper-intelligent horses called Houyhnhnms. So the dominant life form on the island is the dominant life forms on the island are talking, intelligent horses. And these creatures are used as kind of like beasts of burden by the horses. Now, so now that we've like kind of taken the pieces and figured out what the creature itself is, right? What I'd like you to try to do is look closely at the language and think about how the narrator is treating these creatures. Like, what's his attitude towards them? And how does he present himself to us? Does he seem to recognize his own kinship with them?
No, like he's talking as if they're not the same.
Yeah.
No.
Yeah. In fact, what's the last thing he says about them?
That, right there, where he's talking about how he doesn't like them.
Yeah, these things are nasty, right? Yeah.
Describes animals.
Yeah, so there's a joke here, right? That the narrator, the author's in on, and the reader's in on, but the narrator isn't, right?
Right.
So, what else can we say about the narrator based on his vocabulary and the way he talks about these creatures?
He uses very descriptive words.
Very detailed.
Okay, like what? Like, give me an example. Like, what do we mean by descriptive or detailed?
Oh, when you're talking about the colors, like the several colors, brown, red, black, stuff like that.
Like, it's almost like when you read it, you can,
Picture.
like, you can paint the image in your head. First,
Okay.
I thought it was like Tarzan or something.
Okay. Okay, so he gives you a breakdown of all the physical characteristics of this creature, right? Which still make it a little bit hard to piece together what the thing really is, right? Because he doesn't know what the thing really is that he's describing. When we talk about other people, do we usually talk about them in this way?
No.
Yeah, like I wouldn't say, that Corbin wears a cloth construct on his head, and the creature's hair is curly and dark, right? And all I can see are eyebrows above the mask. That's right. I wouldn't break if I was just describing another person or somebody. I wouldn't break them down into various parts like that, right?
But if you're like describing an animal to somebody, especially one that you're not familiar with, that's probably how you do.
Mm-hmm. Especially if you are what? What does he sound like here? And try to combine this with the kinds of words that he uses. What kinds of words does he use to describe these creatures, apart from the fact that he breaks them down into parts? Think about words like anus and pudenda.
It sounds
Prodigious.
It sounds like he's better than them.
Like almost as if like he is like well versed in like what's the word? Like genuses and things like that.
Okay, yeah, he
like
talks.
species of things.
Yeah, he talks like a zoologist, right?
Right,
Describing a
there you
new
go, that's
species
it.
of animal,
That's
right?
it.
All of these kind of Latin-y sounding words that he uses, they sound clinical, right? They sound
Right.
technical. It's sort of like, yeah, this is, these are the parts of the animal.
Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead. What were you going to say?
My phone is going off. Can I turn off the ringer? It's buzzing near my feet and it's
Sure.
bothering
Yeah,
me.
that's fine. So he's approaching these creatures from the position of a scientist, right? And because he's looking at them as a scientist would, he's not seeing them for what they are. He's just seeing them as a collection of disgusting parts, and he's not recognizing their kinship with him. So what we've just done here is a close reading of this passage. And let me explain how this worked, right? So we went through and we put together a pattern to determine what the literal meaning of the passage was, right? Okay, this guy is describing an animal that turns out to be a human being. And then we looked at the language that he used to do this to determine some things about the narrator's characteristics, like what sorts of things are thus implied about the narrator. So the basic methods of close reading are, one, paying attention to the parts of a text and how they're related. Right. What do the words what do the words on the page actually say, and how do they relate to each other? The second part is to take what is explicit in the text and use that to figure out what is implicit in the text. Now here's what we mean by that. So both of these words come from Latin. Explicit comes from explicare, which is a verb that means to fold out. And if explicare means to fold out, then what does implicare
Fold in.
likely mean? Exactly, yes, to fold in. So what is explicit in the text is what the text says, right? Right, the literal meaning of the words on the page. And you can still do a lot with the literal meaning of the words on the page, right? We still had to do a lot of thinking to figure out what literal picture here was being painted, right?
Right.
But once you've got that down, once you've figured out what's explicit in the text, then you need to ask yourself what the text suggests, right? What are the implied meanings, right? And what can we do with them? So, while it's not said here explicitly that Gulliver, the narrator, is some kind of scientist or zoologist or explorer, right? We can tell from his language that this is implied, right? That we are, the kinds of words he uses, okay, this is how we're supposed to take him. And the way he constructs this particular creature. There's also an irony here, again, in the final sentence, in that he dislikes these things and doesn't realize these ones. So clearly he dislikes these things about himself, right?
Right.
So the implications are usually a little harder to get at and take a little bit more work. But that's usually where the real meat of meaning is in the text, right? And when we talk about implications, again, we're not talking about things that aren't there, or reading, or like uncovering secret codes, or like, cracking a walnut and getting some kind of kernel of wisdom out of it, right? I guess I'm in Georgia, I should say cracking a pecan. Or pecan, yes, if you're that. That's what Grandma keeps under the bed. But yeah, so like the meanings are, my point is that the meanings are there, right? And not everybody is always going to get the same implications out of the same piece of text. That's okay, but we need to make sure that the implications that we are getting are based on real evidence, right? So one thing that you're going to want to do is once you pull out the explicit meaning of a text, right? Start making observations about it, about the style, about word choices, about the way words are related to each other. And the question you're going to want to continually ask yourself as you do so, and the question that I will continually ask you until you have been asked it so many times you simply internalize it and start doing it on your own, is so what? Now this isn't intended to be aggressive or dismissive, right? So what is shorthand for what does this mean, and or why does this matter? And it's a good way to try to keep pushing your thinking forward, right? Every time you make an observation, okay, if this, then so what, right? What does this mean? Why does this matter? And everything, right, every word, every image carries implications, right? So, for example, if we think about a rose, what is the literal meaning of the word rose?
It's a flower.
Okay, yeah, it's a flower. It has a red bud and thorns, right?
Right.
But what other ideas does the word rose suggest, right? What other ideas do we attach to this word?
I mean, it is like getting up, like she rose up.
Okay, well, that's another literal meaning of a different form of the word rose, right? If we're just thinking about the rose, the flower, right?
Right.
What kinds of like cultural associations do we attach to the word rose? Maybe that's a better.
Romance.
Pardon?
Romance?
Yeah, love and romance, right? What else? Other ideas that we attach to the rose. If like a poet or a songwriter compares his love to a rose, what does he usually mean?
Well, you know, like Brett Michaels said, every rose has its thorns. So.
Yeah, that came up in my last section too. Yep.
And I was on, and you know, like sometimes it's like, you know, like rose grew through concrete or whatever.
Okay, yeah.
So it's like
mhm.
almost, you know, like a, you know, but that's like totally different from love and romance. It's more like
Yeah.
a determination type.
Sure. Yeah, and that's I think a little bit more context dependent, right?
Right.
But yeah, we tend to associate the rose with beauty, and this is actually relevant to the poison song that you were just mentioning, right?
Right.
It's also associated at least a little bit with pain and danger, right? That beauty, that love, and that romance that come with the rose also come with a little bit of risk because of the thorns, right? So it is a kind of multi-layered, it's an image with multi-layered associations, right? And one of the things we're going to want to pay attention to as we're reading is the different cultural associations that we attach to a lot of these words and images. Right? Just as we figured out that Gulliver is behaving like a scientist because he uses words like anus instead of butthole, right?
Right.
Or pudenda instead of penis or vagina, right? He's using these technical medical terms, these scientific terms, instead of everyday words, right? Okay, so I said I was going to try to give you a couple of thinking tools before we go that you can kind of carry with you forward from this class to other sessions of this class and to other classes. So the one I want to start with is called Occams Razor. Have any of you ever heard of this before? Is this term familiar to anybody?
What did you say?
Occams Razor. Okay. So this is a principle spelled out by a medieval English philosopher by the name of William of Ockham. And essentially what he states is that when there are multiple possible explanations for something, the simplest is usually the best. And by the simplest, he means essentially like the one that has the smallest number of moving parts, right? So, like the one that doesn't depend on lots of people acting in concert with each other. The kind that doesn't depend on certain things going right at just the right time, things like that. Things that don't require supernatural influence or some kind of extreme advanced technical knowledge, right? Most conspiracy theories fall apart when you apply Occam's Razor to them, right? Because they're too complicated and they require too many people to be doing the right things at the right times in coordination with each other to actually work, right? So to give you an example of this, how this can be applied. This is going to be like a slightly long story, but just bear with me for a minute. So when I was a kid, lots of people were firmly convinced, including people in major news media, that there were satanic cults all over the world that were operating through daycare centers, and they were indoctrinating children through ritual abuse, right? There was no actual evidence that this was happening. It was a moral panic that arose mostly from people's anxieties over, two-income households and things like that, right? People felt guilty about leaving their kids at daycare centers, or other people wanted to shame them for doing that, things like that, right? So So a lot of people who bought into this, and there were a lot of people who bought into this, believed that heavy metal music and Dungeons and Dragons were gateways into this kind of satanic activity, right? And in 1990, which is kind of really around the end of this, like we called it, it's called now by historians and sociologists the Satanic Panic. And if you look at it closely, it actually resembles in most of its features QAnon very, very closely, and the thing that the QAnon followers believe. But there are these two young men in Reno, Nevada, who were big fans of a heavy metal band called Judas Priest. One night, they got drunk and high. They listened to their favorite Judas Priest album a bunch of times, and then they went out to a local playground and they both shot themselves. One of them died. The other changed his mind at the very last second and ended up permanently disfigured. Now, both of these young men came from unstable and often violent homes. They both had histories of drink and drug abuse, histories of personal violence and impulsive behavior, and they were high school dropouts with no career prospects, right? What do you think their families claimed was the reason they committed or attempted suicide?
That dang dude.
Exactly. They laid the blame on the band, right? They claimed that the band was recording backwards subliminal messages on their albums that was encouraging their fans to kill themselves. Now, in hindsight, it's kind of surprising that this wasn't laughed out of court, that this actually got a hearing. But once it got into court, it did not pass for the judge the Occams Razor test, right? One, backwards recording into a kind of forward track requires a great deal of technical sophistication and money. It would be super expensive to do it. And the research on subliminal messaging suggests that its effect is shaky at best, right? That no one is certain that this stuff actually works. In fact, most of the available research suggests that it doesn't. Third, the band had no motive for making their fans want to kill themselves, right? If you make your living selling records, selling concert tickets, selling merch, right? Why do you not record subliminal messages that say, go to the mall and buy our shit? And third, or fourth, I forget where I am now. The fact of the matter is that the environmental and personal factors that I mentioned a moment ago seemed like a much simpler, better explanation of these young men's behavior, right? There was nothing in the music that drove them to do it, right? The music is merely circumstantial. It was something that the families focused on so they could blame something.
Instead of blaming themselves.
Yeah, instead of blaming themselves or the young men, right? Yeah. So it was that damn heavy metal band and that devil music, right, that made them do this. Never mind also that the album they were listening to, something like 8 million other people bought that album, and none of them went and did this, right? So Occam's Razor actually works kind of like a razor, right? You take the more extreme and the more ridiculous parts of an argument, or the more ridiculous explanations, right? And you just start shaving them away, right? You cut them away until you are left with something relatively simple that makes sense, right? So anytime someone confronts you with conspiratorial thinking, right, remember this principle. Now, the other thing that we want to make sure we engage in when we are thinking is rigorous and frequent self-examination. Right? whenever you adopt, whenever you want to adopt a particular position or a particular argument, ask yourself repeatedly, why do I believe this? And the reason for doing this is to try to root out two related phenomena: confirmation bias and motivated reasoning. Does anyone know what confirmation bias is? Have any of you heard of this before?
Vaguely, but I couldn't tell you. What's that?
Okay, so confirmation bias, and everybody does this to some extent, right? Everybody engages in this. But confirmation bias is when we tend to seek out information that confirms our pre-existing views, right? And if we're only seeking out information that confirms our worldview, what does that mean we're doing with information that doesn't?
Just ignore it.
We're just pretending it doesn't exist and ignoring it, right? So in order to combat this, it is a good idea to get news and to get information from a variety of different sources, right? From a variety of different perspectives, so that you are not just seeking out news that makes you feel good or information that makes you feel good, right? Because confirmation bias then leads to motivated reasoning, right? Motivated reasoning is what we do with the facts we get through confirmation bias, right? So, well, because I did all this research that confirms what I already believe, I can say that, x equals z and 2 plus 2 equals 5, and everybody else is wrong, right? Yeah, so these are both ways that we try to confirm what we already think about the world without actually having to think about what we think. There are ways to avoid doing any real thinking. And another way we can try to break out of this, right, is to think about the ways in which we're shaped by our social and physical environments, right?
Peter J. like product of your environment type deal.
To an extent, yeah. Have any of you ever had an argument, maybe with an older relative or with a friend, in which they said to you something about common sense, that a particular belief is just common sense?
Yeah.
What do people usually mean by that?
Like you should know that it's
Yeah.
It's like common knowledge.
Yeah.
I guess.
This should be something that's obvious to everyone,
Yeah.
right? But what's obvious to you is often going to depend on your social circumstances, right? Where you're from, who you grew up around, what your parents believed, right? Things like that, right? So things that, people in one region might, or in one social class might regard as common sense, people coming from a different perspective may not, right? So to give you an example of this, right? So you probably figured out, based on the way I speak, that I am not from here, right? Nope, I am not local. Surprise, surprise, right? I grew up in Northeast Pennsylvania. Did any of you watch The Office or ever see The Office? Scranton, yeah, that's where I'm from. So Northeast Pennsylvania is predominantly white, mostly Irish and Polish Catholics, people whose families came over in the 19th century to work in the coal mines. Right now, the most common occupation is unemployed because the coal mines all closed. And there are a couple of other kind of like key cultural differences that made this place difficult for me to navigate when I first got here, right? One has to do with just kind of general social attitudes, right? In general, in the Northeast, the rudest thing you can do is waste somebody's time. So stopping a stranger on the street for small talk is considered impolite, right? Gun culture is also very different, right? Lots of people hunt, and a lot of the area is rural, but open carrying, at least when I was growing up, really wasn't a thing. People didn't usually have their guns with them if they weren't actively using them, and usually kept them locked up in safes. So, when I first came down here and I saw somebody openly packing heat, You know, just, it was like, whoa, you know, what's going on? Like, I didn't know, you know, I didn't know whether this person meant me harm or not, right? And the third big thing kind of has to do with religion. It's not that people in the Northeast are less religious necessarily than people in other parts of the country, but they are more private about their religion than people here are, say, for example, right? So, you know, church generally isn't a huge part of people's social lives, and it's usually considered a matter of private conscience, right? You know, if you could know somebody for years and not know where they go to church or whether they go to church, right? You just, you know, if you're talking to a work friend, it just doesn't come up. Now, what do you think was one of the first questions people asked me when I moved here?
What church do you go to?
Yep, have you found a church home yet, right? And, you know, but because I grew up in a place where people don't talk like that, you know, people don't ask about that, you know, my response is going to be, well, what, you know, it's none of your business, right? Go away, leave me alone. So, you know, it was meant to be maybe a little nosy, right? But also a friendly gesture, right? You know, if you haven't found a church yet, come check out ours. But because people don't talk like that where I'm from, right? My common sense dictated that, you know, that was weird and invasive and a little threatening, right? And, you know, when I'd been down here only about 2 weeks, right, like all of the stereotypes I'd grown up with about the rural South kind of came crashing together. I was out walking my dog on Glessner Street. This was, you know, July of 2012. And these two guys in a pickup truck pull up next to me. And a window rolls down, and I'm thinking, holy fuck, I'm going to get shot. I've only been here 2 weeks. I haven't even started this job. And they're going to kill me. And the one guy sticks his head out the window, and he asks me, like, excuse me, do you drive a Kia? I was like, yeah. And I'm also thinking, like, how the hell do you know that I drive a Kia? Because, again, like, not used to living in a small town, right? And he asked, you know, and I said, yeah. And, you know, he asked me, like, does it get good gas mileage? I was thinking of buying one. I was like, yeah, pretty good. Okay, great, thanks. And, you know, he rolled up the window and drove away. But, you know, again, like, because because I'm not used to people behaving like that, or I wasn't used to people behaving like that, right? I interpreted a completely mundane, non-threatening situation, you know, in a way that made me unnecessarily terrified. Or, you know, I'm standing here crapping my pants when I don't have to be, right? They didn't mean me any harm. There was no threat. But, you know, my lizard brain, because having grown up in different social circumstances and in a different part of the country, interpreted this little meeting as threatening, right? So the broader point that I'm trying to make here is that any text that we're reading, instead of trying to read it through our contemporary 20th century lens, or, you know, the lens of whatever cultural background you are coming from, right? What we need to try to do is understand the background circumstances under which it was produced, right? The culture that the writer was moving in, the ideas that shaped that culture, and what was considered normal or abnormal in that culture, right? So context is often going to determine meaning. Okay, so that's really all I have for you today. Remember to read the first chapter, preparing analytically for next time. If you finish filling out that form, you can put it right there.
So do you want us to read that chapter for Thursdays or read it on Thursday?
Read it for Thursday.
Okay.
Read chapter 1 for Thursday.
Okay.
If for whatever reason you cannot get a copy of the book in a reasonable amount of time, let me know. I can send you a PDF for chapter 1.